Hello, I'm Peter Jackson, Executive Vice President of the Society for Range Management, and I consider this opportunity today very unique because we are going to interview one of the real leaders and pioneers of the range management profession, Mr. Fred Renner and Mr. Keith Miller. Both are people who have made their career in range. Just for the record, so we can keep this for a long time in our archives and history and be able to show it to people. This is Phoenix, Arizona. It's June 28th, right, Keith?
Right.
And I think it's 110 outside and 150 inside. So if we look like we're sweating a little bit, it's not the questions, it's the heat. The Range Society is very young, and because of that, we have the unique opportunity to have people who were the organizers, the pioneers, the originators of a science and art of range management, which are the grasslands and variations thereof of the entire world. And this gentleman had the foresight to be one of the pioneers to get this started. And I would now like to turn it over to Keith Miller, who is with the Bureau of Land Management and has put his career together in the work of the Range Society and of the science and art of range management. And he's got a few questions he'd like to ask Fred and just find out what got started and where Fred got started and why he wanted to become a range management person. So with that, Keith, I'm ready to listen.
Fred, as I understand it, you were the first range management head for the Soil Conservation Service. Is that true?
That's correct, 1936.
1936. And what was your educational background leading up to the science and art of range management, Fred?
Well, it might be called an accident. I graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in forestry, and my first job was as a logging engineer with the Cascade Lumber Company, laying out railroad for the logging outfit. And this is in 1920. And shortly thereafter, terrific depression hit the entire lumber industry of the Northwest. All the mills shut down, the logging operation shut down, and this outfit apparently thought that was a good prospect, so in order to keep me on the payroll, they offered me a job to go back to Minnesota and go on the road selling lumber. Well, I didn't think I was a salesman, and I had no desire to leave the Northwest and go to Minnesota, so I said no. And I'd always been interested in livestock. One time I was about 5 years old, I spent my summers on my dad's ranch in Montana, where I was born. And I thought, well, the field range management ought to offer a great opportunity. I think I'd like that better than forestry. So I rode around to a number of institutions that were teaching range management at that time to see if any chance of getting a fellowship or something of that sort. And several of them offered me a small stipend. The institution that offered me the highest amount was Oregon State College at that time, since known as Oregon State University. And they offered me $75 a month to come down and permit me to take a year of graduate work in pasture and range management and animal husbandry, and serve as a teaching fellow, which was essentially a dog robber for the full professors. And that's what I did. I spent a year taking graduate work there, and the following spring I took the range examination.
Civil service exam.
Civil service examination. It was a 2-day written examination at that time, and I was fortunate enough to pass it. In fact, as I recall, I was the third on the list. There were about 12 people that took and passed the exam that year. The first one, the man that was number one, was a college professor from the East. The second man had taken the examination the year before and had failed it, but that experience was good, so he got second. I was the third.
Mm-hmm.
And I was offered an appointment by the Forest Service in the state of New Mexico. So I went to New Mexico and spent 2 years there on range surveys. And I didn't like New Mexico. The contrast was too great between the green northwest with the running water every place and the dry semi-desert of New Mexico. But I learned a lot. I also had in mind that if it was possible to do so, I wanted to see as much and get as much experience in as many different locations as I could.
Raw the types and all that.
That's right. So an opportunity, after 2 years, an opportunity came up in the state of California to do a range survey on what was then known as the Mendocino National Forest. So I was transferred to California and spent a year on that job. And then I had an opportunity to go back to the state of Washington as a range examiner on a national forest, the Wenatchee National Forest, which had been my home. And that was very welcome. I was delighted. And I spent 4 years there. And then a problem came up with one of the lumber companies in Oregon. There was a dispute between the Forest Service and the lumber company, who owned every alternate section in much of that country, been an old railroad survey. There was a dispute over the carrying capacity, so I spent a year on the Malheur National Forest making a survey there and getting that problem straightened out. And then they had a similar problem on the Mount Hood involving recreationists. And
Had the same troubles then that you have now,
yeah.
right, Fred?
So I went to the Mount Hood for a year and worked with the livestock permittees, and we got them to essentially move a driveway a few miles, and that cured that problem because they got out of the area that the recreationists were using up on Mount Hood. And then I was offered an opportunity to get into research work, to make some watershed studies in the state of Idaho on the Boise National Forest. So I spent 2 years there and spent my winters in Ogden's regional office compiling our data, which was eventually published. And then I spent 4 years at California Forest Range Experiment Station. Well, that's about the time I was in California from 1932 to 36. Well, the Soils Conservation Service, I think, was formed in the Basic Act was passed, I believe, in 1934, and the organization came into being about 1935, and they were looking for somebody to head up the work of that agency with livestock ranchers all over the country. And I was fortunate enough to have wider experience than any other living person, so they picked me and offered me the job in the state of Washington as chief of the Division of Range Management.
Did they call it range then, Fred?
Who called what range?
SCS, did they call it range?
Oh, certainly.
Did they?
Certainly.
So that name,
Yeah.
well, you didn't, it came about logically, then it...
Oh, yes, yeah. And the original examination was, or they call it a range examiner. Well, I was instrumental in getting that changed to range conservation through the Civil Service Commission.
Now, I think there's a key point. So that's the first range conservationist
That's
then
right.
that started to be.
Did that range conservationist start, Fred?
Probably 36, huh?
Oh, I'd say about 37 or 38
37
afterwards,
or 38.
yeah.
after I get into the Washington office.
And we still call them range conservationists today?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, now, did the Forest Service have range conservationists before that?
No.
No,
No,
okay.
nobody did. The title didn't exist.
Didn't exist.
No.
That's a key point. And I was going to, if you didn't mind for just a second while you're getting your thoughts together, how long did it take you, Keith, did you have to pass a written exam like
No.
that?
All we had when I went through was you submitted an application and your college transcripts, and you're graded from that.
I see.
And I was fortunate to get a 7.
You know, it sounds to me like it's like back in the good old days, Fred, when you had to pass an exam out of the 8th grade. You remember your 8th
Yeah.
grade exams? You had to be pretty efficient, didn't you?
Yeah, well, the range examination was 2 days and just about 8 hours a day, and it was
a tough one, huh?
It was
Gee,
tough.
Christopher, I wonder how many of your guys could take 16 hours of steady gruel test to pass their exam, Keith.
Well, I would guess that, they could if they had to, because we have, I think darn good people throughout. The people in the conservation areas, I think, are very conscientious and hardworking and industrious people. Really. They always have been. Because it sure isn't the money or anything, huh, Fred?
No.
Who are your counterparts in other agencies about that time, Fred? When you were head of SCS?
Walt Dutton was the chief of the Division of Range Management for the Forest Service, and W.R. Chapline was head of their range research. Bud Mullahan was the Bureau of Land Management, and gosh, I can't remember the man with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. They had a range man too.
We'll have to check into that if we can, if there's a way so we can make that record complete.
Yeah, of all those people. And how many range conservationists did the SCS have when you were the head of range management in Washington?
About 600.
600?
They had more than any other agency. I don't know whether that's true today or not. I saw a list of the society members here recently that I believe there's more rangemen in the society from the Salt Conservation Service than from any other agency.
Is that right, Pete? Do you know that?
I think that they're right. They and the Forest Service are right neck and neck right now. I guess I'm getting in, but I'm really curious. When a person starts out like you did, I guess, what did they do? Did they just say, start a range management department? Or what did you do? Where'd you get your guys? Where'd you dig up your crews? And this is interesting to me.
Well, of course, the younger men, we got them off the Civil Service Register. They just finished college and taken an exam, just as I had done. A few of them we got from other agencies, or primarily from the Forest Service, not very many, because very frankly, the experience in the Forest Service didn't fit the job of the Salt Conservation Service.
Where you're advising rather than managing.
That's right. It was a wholly different situation. You had to work with the ranchers. You didn't tell them what to do, as the Forest Service was able to do as administrators of federal land.
When you were first conducting your survey, range surveys in California and New Mexico, what kind of surveys were you conducting, Fred?
Well, we made a vegetative map, of course. Somebody before my time, I think Chapline and Forceline and Jardine had come up with the idea they'd patterned a range survey after the forest surveys. On the forest survey, of course, you run lines through a section. You run them so far apart, depending on the intensity of the survey, and you count the number of trees. You measure the diameter of the trees. You have a hypsometer, and you measure the height of the trees, so you can get an estimate of the board feet, and out of that comes an estimate of so many board feet per acre. Well, they had attempted to adapt that scheme to measuring vegetation, and
not much vegetation you could look up at then, was there?
well,
Especially, well, some bushes.
they didn't look up at it. They estimated the density of it.
I see.
How big a portion of the
ground
cover, the ground cover, whether it was 10% or 40% or 50%. And they eventually, of course, wanted to translate that into cow months, into carrying capacity, which was a fallacious idea. And to do that, they had to bring in the value of the different kinds of plants. And they had tables with assigned values to each of the major forage plants. I recall blue grama was rated as 90%. Well, in practical terms, that meant that the rancher or the forest supervisor could permit the cattle to eat 90% of that year's growth. Well, on the other hand, they had research that was telling them that the forage production would vary 100% one year with the next. So it was ridiculous to have a scheme that was trying to develop an average carrying capacity and stock the range on that average carrying capacity when the forage production was going up like this, because you're bound to get overgrazing. Well, it took the Forest Service and some of the rest of us some years to learn that kind of a scheme didn't work, devised other approaches.
Of your varied experiences, like public land management with the Forest Service, and then research with the Forest Service, then really extension with the SCS, which of the three did you like the best, Fred? They were all range management, but...
Well, I had, the only contact I had with the Bureau of Land Management, of course, in those early days was occasionally there were meetings out in the field and in the states where the technicians of the two agencies got together. I didn't do any work on land that was administered by the Bureau of Land Management. My first 15 years with the Forest Service was a highly pleasurable experience. I met a lot of wonderful, dedicated people. I enjoyed the various areas I was in. I enjoyed every bit of that. And of course, the last 25 years with the Soil Conservation Service, it was an ideal career as far as I was concerned.
Well, talking about the science of range management, did you develop manuals in?
Oh, yes, of course.
Okay, I'm trying to get this for the record, Fred. You had to put together their first manuals on how they contacted people.
Right. That's right.
Well, early in the society, I recall reading a letter that you wrote to all of the range conservationists, encouraging them to join the Society for Range Management to keep their professionalism up.
Yes, as you know, the society really was, you might say, incubated at a meeting in Moscow, Idaho, by the university people there that were teaching range management, and representatives of the Soil Conservation Service and the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. They had a workshop, and they all got together, and they discussed the possibility of having a range society. Well, this is 1946. I had been asked to head up a group of technicians to go and make a study of Greek agriculture.
Greek agriculture?
Greek agriculture in 1946.
Over in Greece, then? Over in Europe?
I was in Greece all of 1946 until late October. I had an agronomist, a soil scientist, and an agricultural engineer, and a forester, and then I was supposed to handle range problems. And that project was under the auspices of UNRWA, the predecessor of the United Nations. United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration was its long name. So I got back at the end of October, knowing nothing about this Moscow meeting, and I wanted to get out and see some of the work that was being done in the Soil Conservation Service in the Northwest, so I scheduled my first trip to Portland, Oregon. And I met with Terry White, who was my regional range man in Portland, and he said, first order of business, I set up a luncheon meeting with Joe Pahani. Well, I had known Joe for 20 years. When he was with the Forest Service. I first met him in 1927 when he was doing some research work on the Du Bois sheep station in Idaho. And so we met at lunch, and they told me about the Moscow meeting and the fact that they had circularized the rangemen all over the country, and to see whether there was enough sentiment in favor of a range society.
Well, why? I'm really curious. Now, as you know, I became very involved in the Range Society and enjoyed it very much personally, and had the chance to be an officer. But a question, well, two questions. Who handled it before, and why did you want to separate?
Separate? What do you mean separate?
Well, it seemed like the two, weren't you part of Society of American Foresters or something, or had memberships there?
Some
Most
of the
you
people
fellows
had a forestry background were, yes.
I see.
Well,
Did you fit into that category?
yes. I was a member of the Society of American Foresters.
Okay.
Well, when Joe sprung this on me, why, I said, well, I don't know, Joe, whether this is a good time to start a range society, a professional society or not. But I said, excuse me, those of us that have been in the profession, and I had been for some 24 years at that time, and if we've gotten any pride in it, you've left us no alternative. All we can get to do is just get in and give you all the support we can and make it work.
One of the questions that's always bothered me, Fred, and it hasn't bothered me really, but I was always intrigued with, where did you align yourselves, you fellas, before, like with, like you say, a lot of folks were with the Forest Service, and so, but why did you want to go by yourselves? And to follow up on that, how did you meet as range people before,
There was
like
an
in
organization.
1938, 39, in that
Well,
area, before the war?
These range men that are working for the, primarily at that time, the Forest Service and the Soil Conservation Service. There were very, very few with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. There were very few trained range men with the Bureau of Land Management, because at the outset of the original grazing service and later the Bureau of Land Management, they hired a lot of ranchers, people that knew the range livestock industry, but they didn't hire a lot of trained men out of the universities and colleges. The other two agencies, Soil Conservation Service and the Forest Service, did. Well, these men had known each other in college. They'd gone to the University of Idaho together, or Oregon State College together, or Utah State College together. They'd taken range management. One of them might be working for the Forest Service, one of them might be working for the SCS, but they knew each other. And they had common problems. There might have been a difference, and incidentally, we, the SCS, and in some places the Forest Service also, was also working with the AAA, the Agricultural Adjust Administration, who in turn were working with landowners, with ranchers and farmers. So their differences of opinion would come up about techniques, and these fellows would just get together and feel, let's discuss this, let's see if we can iron these things out.
Just like we're doing today. Yeah.
Now, when it comes back to the society, there was, Joe Pahanik initiated this circular letter that went all to all range men and all agencies that they could learn their names and addresses. And they asked in that circular whether they would prefer to have an independent organization of our own, or ally ourselves with the Society of American Foresters, or the Society for Animal Production, or the Society of Agronomy. Well, some of us had some pretty strong opinions on that sort of thing. First of all, I perhaps shouldn't say this in front of a camera, but the Society of American Foresters was essentially a house organ of the Forest Service. And we didn't want to be, we didn't think that the Society of American Foresters acted on their own. They didn't have any policies that conflicted with the policies of the Forest Service. They weren't permitted to. And we did, some of us in the range field didn't want to put ourselves in that position with any federal agency. We wanted to be independent, to our own course, decide what we wanted to do as far as membership requirements, dues, or whatever. So, and then the majority of the fellows felt the same way.
Well, that answers a real question. Now, that's why then you didn't line up with the Soil Conservation Society then either, did you?
That's right, that's right.
But you aligned yourself with everyone that was interested in rangeland management.
Yeah, that's right.
The rancher, every agency, all of them.
Anybody that had an interest in range management, yes. We wanted them. But we knew that if we allowed ourselves in one of the old existing organizations, we'd be a second-class citizen in that organization.
No, I'd heard that
perfectly
before.
natural.
Yeah, you bet. That was important.
Yeah.
To me, it was darn important.
Now, in thinking back now, Fred, since you're just kind of inventing the wheel then, was there anything you would really do different if you could do it now from then? Start us out different?
One thing that I felt very strongly about, or felt very strongly about at that time, and I think that feeling was shared by a great many of the other members, I wanted to see an organization that had a very strong membership among the landowners, among the ranchers. Well, we tried to do that. We got some of the members, ranchers into the membership, and some of them took in a very active part. 2 or 3 of them became presidents. But we never really succeeded to the extent but I thought we should have. And I think we went at it too fast. We didn't pick the proper ranchers to see that they got to be president. They didn't sustain, most of them didn't sustain their interest in the society. We should have done it a little slower and done a little better job of planning and done a more effective job.
Should have got to Pete earlier, huh?
Right.
Well, I don't know about that, but no, just for a quick comment from a rancher member of the society, and I only take a minute or two here, but I was Bob Ross, who you helped get started and became a state conservationist in Montana, state range conservationist. He got acquainted with me, and then he brought me with him to Rapid City at the annual meeting there, I think in '66 or something like that, wasn't it? And he got me on the agenda as to tell about the range work I'd done on the ranch. And incidentally, I was a student to Gene Payne, who I noticed in our history was one of our secretaries.
That's right.
Okay. Well, anyway, when we were registering, Keith, going down the line and are you going to the banquet? Yeah. Are you going to do this? And I said, sure. And, well, you just as well join while you're here. Well, you're scared to death, so you go along. Yeah, hell, $5, you bet. That's great. And I was a member. Yeah. And I found out one thing, and then I'm going to ask you a question. I discovered all of a sudden that I had something that I could make money at, because I could pick the brains of you two fellas in a forum where you would relax and tell me what I really needed to know about work and range. And for $5, you know, that's pretty cheap. You'll try to hire a lawyer for $5 sometime. But incidentally, what'd you pay, what'd you set dues for originally? They're $50 now.
$3 a year.
$3. God.
And when you joined, it was $5?
$5. But we get a lot. When did you start the journal? Or what's a little history on that?
Well,
not the history we got written down, but the real history.
Well, of course, we discussed the possibilities of publication right at that first meeting, the organizing meeting at the Newhouse Hotel in Salt Lake City in 1946. The journal, as I recall, came into being in 1950.
I think right then, you know.
And Bob Campbell, Dr. Bob Campbell, was our first editor. And it was a gratis job. And when I was president, I saw to it that the editor was put on his salary. And I think that salary was a munificence of $200 a year.
Really got paid. Well, that's dedication by these fellows, Fred, but I got to tell you a little sidelight, and you won't believe it. We got mixed up on our records last year, and Bob Campbell had a life membership, and I sent him a dues notice. And I got a real hot letter right back. And here the man was the first volunteer editor. My Lord. You know, so we're a young organization. We make those mistakes, but we're human. But you also, I'm stuck on the rancher side because that's what I am. And I took range in college, but I actually took animal industry. But Gene Payne hammered range down my neck, and followed by Bob, and then and criticism. But hell, everybody's subject to that. I had a BLM area, and I went to him and I said, "Hey, could you help with a plan?" And they said, "Lord, we don't have enough people to do planning." So I wrote my own and took it back over, and the fellow read it all over carefully and looked at it, and he said, "Yeah, that'll do," and he signed it, and so we had a plan on some BLM land. Since then, now it's a pretty sophisticated plan, and it looks pretty good. But you and I talked before. You said you tried hard, didn't you, to get ranchers right from the beginning?
Yes.
For example, was that kind of in your mind when you got Dan Fulton, for example?
Well, that was just a fortuitous accident. At our first meeting at the Newhouse Hotel in Salt Lake City, I'd come out in the lobby to have a smoke during an intermission, and sitting down there, and Dan was sitting in an adjoining chair, and he said, who is this crowd there? There were about 300 people there, as I recall, and all young, most of them. And I explained who they were. Well, Dan was there. Of course, he was from Ismay, Montana. He was a sheep rancher.
That's the town, Ismay.
That's right.
That's right.
And he had been in Salt Lake City to attend an annual meeting of the National Wool Growers, which had just concluded the day before. So he was still there in the hotel, hadn't checked out. So I told him, explained who these people were, that they were primarily federal employees and some state employees, but from the Forest Service and Soil Conservation Service, Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the extension services of the various states, and some of the professors of range management from various institutions, and they were always all interested in range management. And I invited Dan to go with me back into the meeting and sit down and sit there through the proceedings and, in fact, join the outfit, which he did.
And you know, I'd like to put a comment in here, maybe for whatever it's worth, Keith. But I think that's maybe your answer to getting ranchers in. Bob Ross did that to me. You did that to Dan Fulton. And it isn't just one time. You kind of got to take a rancher because he thinks he's he isn't a bit busier than you are. But he brags that he is. Like, I know I'm one of them, so I know how to do it. But you may have to take him with you half a dozen times before you get the motor started. Yeah. You know, you got to keep putting a little gas to it. It'll finally the guy goes. Maybe that's right. I don't know, but it's obvious because Dan Fulton was a busy man. I know the man.
Yes.
And you got him there some way, and it's stuck. And to me, that's important.
On the agency people, was it hard to get them to keep their professionalism up by joining a professional society?
No, I don't think so. Oh, no, in fact, they were anxious because the more contacts of that kind of technician had,
the better job he could do.
Yes.
Then you were on, were you on the first board of directors?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you were the second president.
That's right.
So this kind of for the record. Yeah. And what do we have, 500, 600 people, 700 or so?
It got up to, and I hate to quote this because I could be wrong. And you asked me to think back 40 years.
Well, I know.
I think it went from 750 to 1,500 during my term of office.
Oh, it really boomed.
It really boomed.
Yeah, yeah.
Why did you incorporate in the state of Wyoming, by the way, Fred?
Well, I didn't know anything about that. This took place after I was president. Of course, I read about it in the journal. That's what was proposed and what was done. As I recall the story at the time, we had two reasons. One, that they had the simplest forms to make out. It was the easiest state in the Union, or in the West, to get incorporated in. And the other was that their fees was the lowest. And of course, we had people there in Wyoming and could take care of it.
Yeah, the signers of that, I think, were Bud Mollahan and Floyd Larson, and some guy by the name of Morgan that I've never heard of.
I don't remember Morgan. Of course, I knew Larson. And wasn't Alan Beadle in on that?
Yeah.
Well,
he wasn't. He didn't sign the article of incorporation.
Oh, yeah.
Well, now Harold Hetty didn't either. Now Harold was the first secretary, wasn't he?
No, the first secretary was Terry White.
Okay.
Was my range man in Portland.
Okay.
Because he worked right there with Joe Pahani.
And the second secretary was Jim Anderson. Is that right? When you were president?
Well, yes, there may have been an intervening one. No, I guess there wasn't. It was Terry held office for 2 years with Joe. Joe held office for 2 years, the first 2 years. And Anderson was the second.
And I think Harold Hetty was in there pretty early.
Yes,
I'd have to check the record and see. Real dedicated
And I think
guy.
the third one was Harold Hoffman.
Could have been. I'd like a minute or two about the very first meetings. Did you have as many papers then as we have now? You attended Salt Lake and you saw what was there. There was, gosh, help me out, Keith. Wasn't there 5 or 6 concurrent sessions going and people coming here and there? What was it like then?
Oh, you mean this last Salt Lake meeting?
Yeah.
Oh, it was one session. Everybody attended a single session, just one session, going at a time.
I see.
Now, this is a 17-ring circus in Salt Lake City here 2 years ago.
Well, I'm getting complaints about that right now.
Yeah, yeah.
that it's got
But they
to
don't
be a
have the
circus.
intermix that they did at one time, you know, they don't
No,
see
no.
everybody and all that.
That's right.
Have you got any comments about what should be at the annual meeting? We have a committee put together right now
Well,
who are supposed to
you-
criticize
You've got
constructively.
to remember that it's been, what, 25 years since I retired from the professional career in the field of range management. And I attended perhaps 10 or 12 annual meetings ranging from Rapid City to San Jose, California to Calgary, Canada for about 10 years after I retired. But I was fortunate enough to take my wife up to Salt Lake City a year ago, and that's the first one I'd attended for several years, so I'm in no position to advise you how to have it.
But you hear and see things and all that, Fred. You're a very astute individual.
Well, sometimes.
Well, I'm going to get into a couple other areas because I want to get a record put together here, Fred, in a casual way. The most prestigious award, and of the society, you donated now. You donated some money, and you must have somehow, I don't know whether you got to Las Vegas and rolled the dice a little better than most,
No.
but anyway, you had a few dollars, and you made a gift to the society, and which generated a annual award with a little bit of cash to go with it, quite a bit, in fact. Now, why did you do that?
Well, I had that one hidden reason, which I don't know whether I should disclose or not. Ever since I took out that first membership as the first life member, for $100, I'm going to say to myself,
Drink of water here?
Yeah.
No problem.
and
Like I said, it's a hot day in Arizona, man. That's the way I like it, because I come from Montana where it's 40 below a lot of times.
so I thought I owed the society something. And I happened to be able to be in a position where I could give them that sum of money. And I thought the society needed an award of some kind that was granted by the board of directors that took in the entire society from any agency, including the ranchers, and that would mean something to the recipients that would get such an award. And I'm glad it's worked out.
Well, it has worked out, and it's getting a little hot in here, and maybe we'll take a break right after about one more question. But your generosity, Fred, has now led to 2 or 3 more awards. Until now, we have the very pleasant problem of trying to figure out how we keep these other awards and give them prominence. We have board action that says the Renner Award, Fred, and you can put this on record, the Renner Award will be the most prestigious award in the range science profession. Underneath that, and Chappie agreed to this, Mr. Chapline have put out 2 awards of lesser nature that'll be right under yours, and now Danny Freeman and Jack Boning of Arizona are going to have another award right under that one, and you really got something going.
Great.
If you don't think you haven't done something, by gosh, you have. One last question, and then we'll break. And I've got it here, and I'd like to present it. I don't know if it can show, but here, Fred, is a picture of Trail Boss and Charles Russell print. Why did you decide to, or did you?
Oh, yes. This is the first.
Where did it come from?
This is the first published use of the Trail Boss on a society publication. Well, I was getting ready for the annual meeting in San Antonio when I was president, and the program for the meeting had been sent to me in typewritten form, and I had taken it down to a printer to get it printed up in some shape as this little leaflet. And I thought, well, let's dress it up a little bit. Well, I'd always been intrigued with Russell's drawing of the Trail Boss. First of all, it symbolizes leadership to me, It symbolizes the necessity of working together. And we had a group of people from a vast number or considerable number of agencies, different backgrounds, but all essentially with a common goal. And I thought that would be a good symbol to use. So I had no authority. I didn't consult with the rest of my board. Didn't tell them what I was doing. I just took a photograph of the drawing with me with the typewritten manuscript of the program, and took it to a printer and said, put this on the front page, on the cover. And
it caught on.
It caught on.
Caught on, looks good.
So I sprung it on them at the San Antonio meeting, and a lot of people were very pleased with it, and they saw some of the same symbolism that I did, and eventually it was formally adopted by the society.
Well, it sure has been formally adopted because all our journals have it on them. Up in the corner, all the stationery, everything has
Membership
got
card.
the membership cards, you bet. And in the office is a great big picture, oh God, 14 by 22 or something like that. And here's the trail boss. It stands for us, and it's just fine. Incidentally, just to throw it on the record, Fred, the journal that you helped start, I had a man come to me the other day, and he said, the first time there is an opening in working with the journal, I would like to have the opportunity because I always wanted to help put out such a prestigious journal.
Oh, great.
It's becoming one of the top scientific journals there is. And so I think we'll call this to a close on the professionalism, because this man is a man of many careers. And we'll take a look at another one that, if anything, he's more world famous for this than for his work with the Rain Society, but the Rain Society and the country as a whole has gotten more from the range than from his second career. Now, let's try to figure out, after all those words, what we're talking about. So we'll move on to the next in a little bit, okay?